Welcome to IS Squared's podcast, where we bring you the latest trends in technology.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Cyber Talk with Nikolai, and today we're going to be talking about National Cybersecurity Strategy, and we have a guest, Jim Roth, and you're already familiar with him, and Jim has been known in the industry for quite some time, and I think he's the best candidate to have conversation about national cybersecurity given his breadth of knowledge and what he brings to the table. So before we start, I think one thing that I'd like to mention, and when I was reading this cybersecurity executive order for national cybersecurity, one thing came to mind that I think it's this law is timely right now. And when I was thinking back a few years ago and had conversation with my peers and colleagues, one thing that was striking that all small companies and individuals had to put up for a big fight against national threats, and they were not equipped. So, in essence, the government or the laws were requiring people, if you look at the kinetic space where the wars are being fought at some times, so we were required, our companies were required to buy sort of like anti-aircraft missile defenses to defend themselves versus it was a government's job that everyone is paying taxes to bring those things together, and we will take care of small things. So we had police, we had national security, we have actually all the defenses, and you have NORAD and a bunch of other things to protect us from kinetical warfare. But yet, when it came to cyberspace, we were largely unprotected, and any company was fair game for nation states to go and attack. And when I was reading this particular order, and I saw a balance the responsibility to defend cyberspace by shifting the burden for cybersecurity away from individuals and small businesses to organizations that are the most equipped. I thought it was a step in the right direction, and it felt really good, but I don't think it's enough. I think government has to play a little bit more role. But okay, I'm gonna stop my rambling on this, and I'm gonna turn over to Jim Ross, and I'd like to hear, Jim, a little bit on your take when you saw this law. What came through your mind? And I know you have a lot of things to share with us. So, Jim, on to you.
Nikolai, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for participating in this. I was a history major as an undergrad, so I love history. So I share that up front because it's good to look at this recent publication of the directive coming out of the executive branch of our government that is really comprehensive in the coverage of cybersecurity, resilience, and that's a good thing. But I look at it historically because 10 years ago, just as an example and use it as a data point, we really didn't have a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy as it relates to policy. So there wasn't really a published cybersecurity policy that incorporated both the offensive capability that was not even discussed or identified publicly, and the defensive capability, which is how do you protect enterprises, both critical infrastructure within the government and in private industry as well. So there really wasn't a comprehensive strategy, or at least there wasn't documentation of that was shared with the public 10 years ago. And of course, we decided to essentially create a offensive weapon that we use to attack N10s in Iran, and specifically the production of nuclear fuel. So the net result was Stuxnet. Stuxnet got released inadvertently to the public through the internet. And that's when we kind of discovered it. And I say we collectively, everyone in cybersecurity realized, oh, yeah, there's a weapon that our tax dollars funded that got out in the wild and has implications. And the reason I bring that up is it changed the response of primarily four nation states that are clear adversaries of the United States. In They moved from covert cybersecurity activity to really overt cybersecurity activity, and many of their activities were blatantly attempts to raise money to fund additional offensive cybersecurity capability and to expand cybersecurity offensive capability and more broadly attack different types of infrastructure that spilled over and hit the public and the private sector in terms of collateral damage. And so it turns out that having great offensive cyber capability as a nation state has some benefits, certainly, and advantages. But when you have the largest attack surface, as the U.S. has, it's kind of like throwing rocks or stones in a glass house. We have more to lose than other countries that are attacking us because of the size and breadth of the attack surface. So this publication clearly lays out a strategy that's comprehensive. And Nikolai, I put that in the plus column, that it includes, as an example, it includes offensive capability. Now, there's not a whole lot of information about what our intent is to use different types of offensive weaponry in cybersecurity. But what is clear is that we're acknowledging that we have some capability and we will use it and have used it. And I think that's a positive thing to acknowledge that that's part of the overall cybersecurity policy and direction. On the negative side, from my perspective, is the document reads as if it's a acknowledgement for this administration to basically pat themselves on the back for what they've done in furthering cybersecurity policy. And the number of times that these words, this administration, are used kind of indicates that this is designed to score some political points as well as lay out a comprehensive policy. So I put that on the negative side of the equation. I just don't think it's necessary, and frankly, I think the document would have more legs if that wasn't the case. But you take the good with the bad on these things, and overall, I think it balances out to be good. It clearly acknowledges the role of the different federal agencies that have cybersecurity capabilities, defensive capabilities, as well as some offensive capabilities, but mostly defensive capabilities. The role of them to partner with private enterprise, recognizing that critical infrastructure really is not exclusively within the government, it's in the private sector, and in many cases, a lot of it is in the private sector. You think about the grid and the managing the electric grid for the U.S. as an example of that. And it clearly sets the tone that the partnership and collaboration is absolutely essential. It goes a little bit further, which I think was really helpful in saying that federal agencies that have cybersecurity capability need to work together, certainly on incident response, but also on defensive measures to protect critical infrastructure. And that's, number one, that's an important thing. Number two, that's a bit of a weakness historically, or has been a weakness historically, in that different agencies really didn't work together. They actually worked at odds with each other, even though they had knowledge, experience, skill, capability that could be shared in the best interest for the nation. But a lot of times there was competition between different factions of federal agencies. And although some of that still exists, I think it's diluted, and I think it clearly, this document states a direction of being more collaborative and working together just within the federal sector. And I think that's a positive step forward. It reinforces this notion resilience and the ownership of resilience is those who put out technology products that we have to, if we produce technology products, hardware, software combination, we have to focus on the responsibility and obligation of making that more resilient. A lot of the burden of resilience is on all of us as end users, and this document is setting a direction to counterbalance that and put a little bit more responsibility, maybe on cloud service providers, as an example, SaaS providers, and really anybody, any commercial software that's produced, put more emphasis on resilience. Private enterprises put more emphasis on resilience of the infrastructure and the software that's produced, and that's moving accountability to I think where it belongs. And there's certainly lots of opportunity for improvement to improve resilience across whenever we produce software or hardware. It talks about some major investments that are being made. It doesn't give dollar amounts for the infrastructure spend, but both in terms of next generation internet, getting broadband access to everyone in the U.S., and working collectively with international agencies. All of that is identified as a strategic focus. I think that's all good. The investment that we're making in chip manufacturing and production capability it will go a long way to helping us over the long term. Again, that's good on the positive side. And the in the actions speak louder than words department, making these major investments is something that the federal government can do using their wallet to influence technology evolution. Government's been doing that for a long time. They're obviously going to use that as a tool going forward, and I think that's a positive thing. That's something that they can change and influence based on their size of their wallet, how much influence the federal government has in spending on technology. So that's all good. Ensuring that federal agencies play nice in the sandbox, so to speak, and work collectively and together. I mentioned that. That's a real positive thing to see, at least as a direction. And again, driving accountability. Now, the one thing that's on both a positive and negative, perhaps, Nikolai, is that it's clear that new regulations are forthcoming. And in some cases, I think that's good news and necessary. In other cases, we have to recognize that regulatory governance models evolve initially from laws. Laws are made through the legislative process, kind of like sausage making. And there are a lot of trade-offs that are made for different reasons in the formulation of ultimately what becomes law from a regulatory standpoint. And then there's usually a lag time of a couple of years before the agencies that have accountability and responsibility for regulatory enforcement figure out how to actually apply the enforcement, especially for new regulatory requirements. So it's a long-term process. It's an iterative process, and it's not a perfect process. But so I think that, there's a clear message that we're going to have more regulation in the private sector. It's not quite clear what the form of that regulation will be, but there is some acknowledgement that there has to be some collaboration between the private sector and the federal sector in creating the new regulatory constructs. So that's all, that's all, more positive than negative, but how that's done and what that looks like is kind of remains to be seen. So overall, Nikolai, I think there's more good than bad. There's maybe a balance of both, but I'm generally optimistic by this version of what I saw.
Thank you everyone for joining us on the part one. for episode Cyber Talk with Nikolai and Unpacking National Cybersecurity with Jim Ross. Stay tuned for part 2.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about these topics or IS Squared, please go to www.issquaredinc.com.